Hello, everybody. Welcome to Latter-day Struggles. Today, I am so excited. I have a woman with me who I just can't adore enough. I'm introducing you today to...
This is her giggling.
That's right. I'm as giddy as can be. This is Lynn Pearson here with me today. Hello, Lynn. How are you?
Well, I am just fine, Valerie, and the better for being with you. Thank you for this invitation.
You're so welcome. You are such an inspiration to so many of us in and around the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so it is just such a pleasure to spend a few minutes with you. And for all of you out there listening, I have a treat in store for you. This is a Christmas surprise. I'm calling this my Wise Woman series. We've got Carolyn here today, and we've got her here for our next episode as well. And we are going to go deeply into a number of really, really beautiful and important topics. So today, just to give you a little bit of rundown about what we're going to talk about, I would love to have Carolyn talk to us about a little bit about her history and a lot about, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm selfishly choosing some of the things that matter most to me from what I have read and learned about her. And so because I'm the interviewer, I get to choose. So we're going to talk about we're going to talk about some of her books, and most importantly, perhaps her most recent book that I just read, and it's phenomenal. And so we're going to end our episode with that. So go ahead, if you would, Carolyn. I'm going to let's just pretend for a moment that there's somebody here on this podcast who does not know who you are. How would you describe who you are and what you are here for? What do you feel like in your life you are accomplishing?
Wow. I am pleased to try to remember the important things that somebody who does not know me might be interested in. And because we're going to move on to Mormon territory or Latter-day Saint territory, I'm just going to go back a little bit before my birth even. I have very deep roots in Mormondom. My ancestors on both sides of the family were all pioneers. My grandmother, not my great, but my grandmother walked across the plains when she was 8 years old. And I had someone on the ship Brooklyn, someone on the Mormon battalion. So all of these things are deep in my genetic makeup. So I was born in 1939. Don't tell anybody.
Okay, that's between you and me.
Just between us.
Yes.
From parents who were really very good parents, and as many of their generation were not very emotionally accessible. You know, everything was business. Sure. They married late in life. At age 39, my mother had twins, followed by a boy, followed by me, followed by a sister. Wow. So that was our family, and we lived in Salt Lake City. When I was 8, we moved out to Gusher, Utah. No one's ever heard of that little place between Roosevelt and Vernal in the Uinta Basin. My father taught for the government, taught Indians farming, and my mother taught school. And so I was, for those 5 years, the 2 of the years we were without electricity or running water. So I have a background that kind of has some kind of experience with some of the old stuff. And when we were finally able to leave there and move to Provo, we built a house there, and my mother passed away from cancer 2 years later when I was 15. I was going to school at BY High School, the teaching academy really for the university. And I had really good teachers all the way through from high school. And then I went to BYU, majored in drama, got a master's degree in theater, loved it, got to play some wonderful roles. I got to play Joan of Arc.
Oh, wow.
What could be better than that?
That set you up, didn't it?
Listen, I have sometimes said, without laughing, the first mistake the brethren made with me was letting me play Joan of Arc on the stage.
That might be the best thing. Best thing they ever did.
in the Joseph Smith building, memorial building. So yeah, that was great. And then I got to play the wife of Job in a poetic play called J.B., seeing the whole story in a contemporary poetic context. I was the wife, and I got to shout those terrible, awful, awesome words, curse God and die. Wow. And then at the end, I'm the one that also helps with whatever healing. That's a great play. Mm-hmm. I wish more people knew about it. So after my time at BYU, I taught school for a year at Snow College, saved my money so I could retire, traveled for a year, was in Russia at the time. President Kennedy was assassinated, ended up spending 3 months in Israel on a kibbutz, studying Hebrew and working on the farm. And then I came home and worked for a bit for BYU Motion Pictures. Was in one more play at BYU where I met this wonderful young man that I really fell for, named Lynn Pearson. And as anybody who knows my story knows, that he and I married and had 4 children and experienced what quite a few of our people in our faith do, of mixed orientation marriage, trying to make it work. I knew before our marriage that he had homosexual experiences, but that's not who he was. He loved the church. He had been a missionary in Australia, and he loved me as very best he could. So we went ahead with the marriage, and then about 8 years later, we determined it was just finally not going to work. And after moved from Provo to the Bay Area here in this house, as one of my most famous books tells, our personal story there of my husband coming down with AIDS and passing away in 1984, which was in this house where I was caring for him. We had divorced, but we had remained good friends. So that's the story of that. But back to the books, I only became a published writer because my dear queer husband insisted on it. The first year of our marriage, he said, "We've got to publish these little poems of yours that I love so much." And I thought, oh, how do you do this? So anyway, he was very aggressive in wanting, when he got an idea of what he wanted to have happen. So he published this little book called Beginnings that just by fluke or by fate or whatever put me on the map in Mormondom in a way that just astonished me. Mm. And so that opened the door to everything. And that I began to do. See, I was born into women's issues, and then I married into gay issues. And those are the 2 tracks of social challenge that I found myself devoted to. Not of my own free will, but that's what was inside of me that said, hey, pay attention. You are called to do something about women's issues. And look, this experience you've had with your husband, this calls you to do something about gay issues. And so that's what I've devoted myself to. I have been called to do the work that I'm doing.
Carolyn, what you're describing is so incredibly inspiring to me, because it, to me, I feel like the greatest and truest callings are not issued by another human being, but they come
absolutely
directly from God, and they come and they rest within us, and we know within ourselves, and we are given then the power and the ability to do very frightening and brave and courageous things. Can you explain just for a minute, and we are going to get to the books, but I can't resist but to ask, how long have you known you've had this beautiful call to tackle these tough issues?
Well, it's only in the last few years, I guess, that I've been actually naming it a calling. Mm. All the way through, it's just, this is in front of you and you have to do it. Yeah. And that's all I knew. I just had to do it. Yes. And then, of course, when I began earning my living as a writer, my financial ability to feed my children depended on an income, and I learned that writing for me was the very best way to do that. And fortunately, the things that I was passionate about or felt really called to were things that other people seemed to also have an interest in,
Yes.
things that elicited this calling I had to point out things that need to be addressed. And I found that enough people felt that same way, but had not developed or been given the voice or the position that I have had. See, this is what allows me right now to be able to say, pretty challenging things. I spent a long time cultivating a voice and a platform
Yes.
that for a long time was, just very safe and very acceptable to everybody. Because who wouldn't like these lovely poems in beginnings? Who would not like My Turn on Earth? But also, really early on, I began to write books about Mormon women. I wrote Daughters of Light, the compilation of the spiritual histories of a lot of early Mormon women. And then The Flight in the Nest, what those early Utah women were doing about women's issues, about education, about politics, about the professions. So I early on began to show my real colors.
You sound to me like, having cultivated a voice early on. Well, let me put it this way. It sounds to me like what I'm hearing you say is that you gained a lot of trust and credibility early on with certain issues that gave you the confidence to be able to then walk into slightly more challenging issues as your own life evolved, as you developed and matured, and life taught you, and your experiences taught you, and cultivated within you the courage to speak about your own personal experiences and how the church could be
Mhm.
helped by your strengthening voice.
I would say
Yeah.
that's fair. That's
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
So let me just let's go ahead and like kind of lock in on. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, so we have a couple earlier books. Goodbye, I Love You is a very autobiographical book about your experience with your sweet deceased husband. And then we have No More Goodbyes, which is a follow-up book that came several years later, which tackles sort of head on the harm done and the crisis that our church is in, and many people within the church are experiencing because of our current theology and doctrine around gender and sexual minority issues. Okay, so when did you publish Goodbye, I Love You, Carolyn? What year was that? You?
That was in 1986. Gerald's
Okay.
death had been in 1984.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but in my own mind, I'm thinking that book and your ability to articulate what you did that was very early on in the history of this movement. Am I thinking about that right? It feels like in the 80s, nobody was talking about this in the church.
But you're right. Goodbye, I Love You was really one of the first major contributions that addressed the subject of homosexuality
Yeah.
in a compassionate nature.
Yes.
It was one of the first.
So talk to us for a minute, if you would, about how was that for you to be perhaps like truly, and I love we can use this pioneer word because we like pioneers, Mormon pioneers. You were truly a Mormon pioneer in addressing this incredibly loaded issue that was loaded not only in Christian circles,
Yeah,
but in the world at large. And you were publishing a book
right.
about your own experience, saying something is not right here and we need to start talking about it. What was that like for you?
Yeah, that was very scary.
Yeah.
And Gerald and I had never discussed the idea that I would write a book about our life together. It had never come up in conversation. And in my mind, it had never come up.
Mm.
It was too shameful. Why in the world would I ever want to write about that? But I remember a week or two after after he passed, and the situation in And we're here near San Francisco, but all in Salt Lake, everywhere in the country. Young, especially young gay men were dying on the sidewalks, having been thrown away by their families, by their
Mm.
churches. And when I acknowledged that, I thought, I thought if I were able to write our story, it could be useful for a lot of people, because Gerald and I learned a lot of things. And so within a few weeks, and I got permission ultimately from his parents, who were shocked at the idea, but eventually agreed. And our children were, fairly young. The oldest was 16, but they had a sense that their father would want this. And so I wrote this, and I got an agent immediately who sold it to Random House, one of the big ones in New York. But it was scary. I mean, I knew it was important, and I knew that it was correct, that I was aligned correctly with myself and with the universe or God or whatever you want to call all this stuff that holds us up. Uh, but I didn't know what it would mean for me. I just didn't know. And I remember when my editor at Random House called and said, we were sending out advance copies of the book, and we've had a request from a company named Deseret Book in Salt Lake City to receive an advance copy. And I remember I just thought, oh, I can't do this. What was so? But then about 10 days later, when she called back and said, Deseret Book has ordered 1,000 copies of Goodbye, I Love You. I just burst into tears, which I still do, even thinking about that, because I knew it was going to be okay. And she said also they want you to come and do book signings at their store in Salt Lake City on what they're calling conference weekend. And I want you to also do one in Orem at their bookstore. So, boy, I remember going into that first book signing at Deseret Book, and there was a long line already waiting for me to sign the books. And I thought, every one of these people are someone who has been suffering in silence for something about this issue. And it's a rare privilege to be able to give them something to salve their heart and open their mind. And so the overwhelming positive response that I got from LDS people was really remarkable. Only just such a few. I think there were 2 bookstores somewhere in the chain of LDS selling that refused to take any of my books after that. And a few individuals just thought it was horrendous that I should write about that. But the huge, huge majority of people within the church, and not just people who had gay family or were gay themselves, but people who wrote me. In fact, my largest file became LDS people who just wanted to thank me, people who said, I'm not gay. I don't know of any gay person in my family, but I want you to thank you for helping me understand this thing that I've never been able to understand. So that was a huge thing for me and for so many people on this subject. And I think, other related kinds of subjects, to see that something could be written from a point of view that's compassionate but true about a hard thing, and it would be accepted, and it would move things forward. And I'm very grateful I was able to do that.
Thank you so much for that. I just can't help but think that truth resonates. Truth sets us free, and as you have been given the ability
Indeed, yeah.
to write and to speak,
Yes.
and to share
Yes,
your own story
right.
that go ahead.
And you mentioned No More Goodbyes. That really, I believe that came out in '08, on this the same year that I wrote a stage play called Facing East. It premiered in Utah, had tremendous response. The Deseret News gave it the best play of the year award, tied with Hamlet at Shakespeare Festival. But this Facing East is a story of an upright Mormon couple dealing with the suicide of their gay son. And oh, that was an amazing experience to see those audiences fill up that little theater over and over and over again.
Wow.
So yes, and No More Goodbyes, I wrote because it after Goodbye I Love You, I thought, okay, I'm finished with that issue.
Yeah.
And then I decided to do this play because theater is something I love so much. And I thought, we're still not where we need to be, because these gay suicides in Utah, well, it's been in the newspaper, in the national newspaper. And so I pulled up my stories and contacted more people for their stories, and wrote that book, No More Goodbyes, circling the wagons around our gay loved ones, looking at the toll that still was taken then and is still being taken now. Yes. With a little difference in certain things, but in major things, no difference. But there's still a lot of suicides, ill-fated marriages. I hear from them people all the time. Yes. And family alienation. That is getting better. We have society down here at the bottom, including LDS society, has definitely moved monumentally steps forward in how we see and treat our LGBT people.
Yes, you have about more than 40 years experience of sort of watching this evolve. Let me ask you this question, Carolyn. I'm thinking about how I'm just struck by and absolutely touched at your sharing that even from the very beginning, clear back in the 80s, before in some ways this was even sort of more like socially acceptable in the larger culture, our own people were very open and compassionate and grateful for your voice, for your point of view. And so you have that has just been actually moving forward more quickly as the years go by. We have this movement, this motion at the bottom. And then if you take a pause and think about how much movement have we made from the perspective of the institution itself and the leadership, can you talk to me about, or talk to us about, how do you reconcile that, or what is it like for you to manage the difference in movement at the grassroots level as opposed to at the the very small leadership level up at the top? What do you do with that?
I don't reconcile it. It's not reconcilable. When you ask, for a marriage to be reconciled, they're coming, they're working together and make. No, I think that as an institution, we're not anywhere where we need to be. That makes me very sad.
Yes. Yeah, it just kind of circles me back to our own inner divine callings to speak truth in love and to keep sort of pushing forward is really where we have to go.
Every one of us has our own godly connection. Yeah. And we receive our own information about what is correct for us. Yeah. And what is correct for us to want to move something forward in the larger world. Yes. And we better be pretty clear with ourselves that that is a correct thing. But we all have the ability, and it was not granted us by anybody who laid hands on our head.
Right.
This is a gift we came with, a godly gift. See, we are not apart from God, struggling That's part of your the word that you're using. I don't struggle with the church at all. I know what I believe and what I don't believe. There's no struggle involved.
Yeah.
So I think all of us have the ability to say, it's clear to me
Mm.
that this idea or this concept, this something needs to be made better for this group of people or for all of us. And if something's made better for a group of people, it's made better for all of us because everybody is connected at some level.
Yes.
So we all have the ability to say, this is calling my attention. And that's what a calling is.
Mm.
If something calls your attention and you can't get rid of the voice in your head that says you need to do something about that, or else you're going to feel very bad. That's what I have done. And that's what I urge everybody to do, to listen to the things that seem to be grabbing your attention, saying there is an improvement that needs to be moved forward, and you are asked to be part of that.
Wow.
It's really that simple.
Yes. You're
So now where
describing, oh,
were we?
go ahead. Sorry.
And no, did I answer
You
what you had just brought up?
you did answer a question, but you actually are evoking in me a new question. So my
Okay.
question to you is this. You're describing this probably lifelong process of cultivating your own inner confidence and your own personal authority. And yet at the same time, I think that so many of us don't feel that. We don't have that personal authority. And so people do, in fact, really struggle. And so I'm wanting to know if you can talk to us all. And we're going to go into this more deeply in our next episode, but I want you to just touch on because you brought it up. You say, I don't struggle. I feel this peace because I know what I believe. So talk us through a little bit like, have you always felt that, or is this sort of an
Well,
evolution?
Valerie, don't forget you're talking to the woman who, as a young woman, played Joan of Arc on the BYU stage.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
um, I don't know that I have a good full answer, but I think if each of us listens to what's going on inside, and we move to a place that says, I really want to assist in making this happen. Oh, but it's so scary. Oh, it's so scary. Well, we just have to take the step anyway.
Mm.
Be frightened, but do it anyway.
Amen.
And I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah.
Even if you knew, as Joan of Arc knew that she was going to be burned at the stake if she recanted what she had said and gave up her visions. What would you rather live with? Somebody's condemnation of you for speaking your own truth. Would you rather live with that condemnation, or would you rather live with the condemnation of your own conscience?
Yeah.
So I want to urge everybody here who is frightened by taking a step forward. And I'm not suggesting that people should be as bold. I've had the privilege of being bold. I had developed a platform and developed the language and had certain successes that buoyed me up and protected me. But nevertheless, a number of that one of the most difficult books I have written is The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy. And if somebody had told me that, hey, if you write that book, you'd for absolutely 100% certain you'll be excommunicated, I would have written that book because it's that important to me.
Can we stay there? Because that was actually my next place that I wanted to go. So you have
Okay.
teed us right up for probably the first of, well, I've read many of your books by now, but that may have been the first one that I read. And it was recommended to me by a number of people as I was doing my own, probably sort of mandatory deep dive into polygamy as we're growing spiritually. in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Everybody has to jump off of that diving board at some point in time, I think. And gratefully, I approached your book and, of course, couldn't put it down. And I would love to hear a little bit more about that. Well, first of all, the decision you made in creating that book, and then a little bit more about your process, because it's a very unique and special book. So just talk about that for a little bit, if you would.
Sure. I can't pinpoint a time when I actually decided to write the book. But in the book itself, I indicate clearly that from way back in my high school days, this exploded into my mind, into my spirit, as something that was devastating and continued to be devastating. And I think back then, and I tell it in the book, I had a wonderful seminary teacher who bore his testimony that in the next life he would claim as wives his first wife that he was sealed to and the current wife that he is now sealed to. And that if when we sisters become less selfish, we will understand the beauty of all this and we will yearn to live God's true order of marriage. And I that landed on me like an explosion, not out of heaven, but somewhere else, that just erupted into the very first questioning I ever had about God, about my church, because I knew that either I was terribly, terribly wrong or something in the system was wrong.
Wow.
And I lived with that dichotomy for a long time. I've got to be wrong because the church is right on everything, everything. So I've got to be wrong. I've got to figure out how to get myself in line here.
Wow.
And decades later, after I fully grew up spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, socially, I said, I don't know exactly how this happens, but I know that what I'm feeling here is right. I know that I am not wrong. I know that there is something in our system, especially around women's issues in this church that I love, and especially about the issue of polygamy. There is something that is so wrong.
Yes.
And that was with me for a long time. And ultimately I decided, I just need to do something, because I always had women approach me, write me letters. My heart is broken because I know that in the next life I'm going to be an eternal polygamist, and I didn't sign up for this, and just all of that patriarchal privilege stuff.
Yeah.
That is just so wrong, 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 wrong.
Yes.
I just felt, okay, this has to be done, and by golly, I'm the one who's called to do it. And I knew that I was. I knew that I had the capacity to do it. I knew I had the words to do it. I knew I had the passion to do it. And so I gathered around me the people that could help me. That would be a long story in and of itself. And did put out this survey asking LDS, active, non-active, former women, men, to respond to these questions, give me stories about their experience or someone close to them about eternal polygamy. And I received ultimately over 8,000 responses to that. And about 2,000 of them sent me little stories, totally anonymous. I wouldn't be able to track them down if I wanted to. But I spent a summer reading all of those stories and extracting samples that showed the breadth, the depth of the pain that women and men experienced over this anticipation that in the eternities, we're going to be, if we're righteous enough, we'll more than likely be living in polygamy.
Wow.
So I wrote that book and I loved writing it. I was energized. I was excited to get up in the morning and work on that book. And I loved sitting here in this chair, just looking right where I'm looking at you, typing, that whole thing. And that I self-published that book. I tried to find a publisher elsewhere, right? Because I thought nationally, this should be, information that people should know. We're interested in what's happening with Muslim women.
Right.
Why aren't people interested in knowing what's happening with Mormon women? Well, anyway, I published it myself, but I've been very pleased with the response. Very, very pleased. And I've had so many people contact me, sending me emails, telling me that that they were certain that they knew they had to give up polygamy, but they thought they'd have to just drop the church if they did. And they said, "Thank you for showing me a way that I don't have to drop this church if I don't want to.
Mm,
I can throw away polygamy and still hold on to the church if I want to."
yes.
So that was one of the things that I wanted so much to give people. And I still receive messages from women. Well, not long ago, one that a woman wrote me and said, my husband just finished reading The Ghost of Eternal Polygamy, and he wept. He said, "This is the first time I've understood what you've been going through."
Oh,
She said, "All of the years of our marriage, I held back a part of my heart from my husband because I knew that at some time, even in the eternities, I was going to have to see him having the kind of relationship with other women that he and I have now." She said, "I would give anything to get those years back that I wasted feeling that way." Now, see, shame, shame, shame on the people in charge who could make a difference, but they are more devoted to protecting the reputation of our founding prophet than they are to blessing the emotional, spiritual lives of the women in this church and the men in this church. And that is a shame.
yes. Thank you for your bravery, Carolyn.
And for those who haven't read the book, let me just make clear that in, I think, chapter 2 or 3, I make it very, very clear that I am personally persuaded that Joseph, about whom I say so many good things in this book, it would surprise you how many good things I have to say about brother Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
But I say very clearly that it is my absolute conviction that this was one of his errors. This was his biggest error. He had other errors that are documented. The Kirtland Bank thing is very well documented, but nobody wakes up in the night crying about the fact of how Joseph messed up the Kirtland Bank stuff. But hundreds of women every day, I dare say thousands, I dare say tens of thousands of women in our church who either have a significant unease about all this or a deep personal pain. And that is not okay. And so I say very clearly in this book that I, just as one human being, as one woman who has lived through all of the thinking and the pain and the anticipation and the horror and the decision that it's just wrong, I say out loud, I believe God had nothing to do with Joseph's polygamy.
And you're giving people permission to think and feel complexly, and to think and feel and trust in their own God-given intuitions that their parents in heaven have endowed them with since the very beginning, and that have also often been sort of discouraged out of us.
Radical thought to encourage that kind of self-belief.
Yeah, it is radical in some circles, and yet it's mandatory for us to grow and continue to be made over in the image of our father and mother gods. That's what we are capable of doing. And
Absolutely.
that is, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And
So that,
and it's wonderful that we can have conversations like this.
yes.
And I don't believe that you and I are going to be called into a court for having this kind of conversation. I know it makes a lot of men uncomfortable,
Yes.
but there are too many of us. There are way too many women in our church right now, and men, who are understanding that there are certain things that have been painful for too long.
Yes.
And we intend to address them because this is our home. This is
Yes.
our family and our home. And we have a right to speak about the pain in the family.
And that's what you have given your life to. And Carolyn, you are my greatest mentor.
Thank you. Thank you, Valerie.
You're so welcome. Let's move to, I could talk about this all day, but I know our time is limited. We both have other things to do today, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and
Oh,
spend.
I'm yours for as long as you want me. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So what you have spoken about and what you seem absolutely gifted and called to do is speak about the intersection of spirituality, gender, sexuality, and power. And that is, in my opinion, our greatest struggle here in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We struggle with gender, sexuality, and issues of power. And I love how you are inviting us to believe in ourselves, to have courage, to have confidence, to have a voice, and to remember that we owe our allegiance to God. And that if we feel buoyed up and lifted and called by God, to do the things that we know to be true, to have that voice and to use that voice, and to work through the inevitabilities of some of the fear that has been embedded within us systemically, and just recognize that it's going to probably just maybe be there. But I'm much earlier on in this process than you are, Carolyn. But I will even say, even in just a very short period of time I have done this, my fear has dissipated enormously. And what has filled its space is courage and a conviction that I am on God's errand.
Mhm.
Just as you have shown us
Yeah.
and modeled for so many of us here in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that we can hold complex thoughts, ideas, conversations, that women have so much power in this church and that we can seize it even if it is not handed to us. And that is an incredibly beautiful way to start thinking about ourselves as women in the church. And there are so many men in the church that want this for us. We are not on our own. I know there's so many good men that suffer just as badly with the issues of patriarchy as the women that they love and are surrounded by. So I think it's really important for us to think about how many people are wounded by some of these blind spots that are not necessarily being formally addressed, but we ourselves have the ability to address them as powerful people and children of God. And so I thank you so much for helping, like walking us through your own process through those, through that handful of books.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think it would be great for us to spend the rest of our time talking about your most recent book. And I'm going to just cue us up for that book by actually saying that this book too, although it is different in some ways because it is not specific to a sort of an LDS audience, it actually does a very beautiful job and taught me many things. But one of the things that I really loved about your book, The Love Map, is it talks about this concept of the true self. This idea that there's something deep within each of us that is powerful and is grown, and we grow and become more true and more able to embrace challenges and overcome things through love. And you use a lot of these concepts in this book. The true self is who is really inside, and then sometimes other things enter in and make it challenging for us. And so why don't you just tell us a little bit more, those who have not read this book, because it is, again, it's newer. Talk a little bit about your process and about this book and why you love it so much. You told me you were just so excited to write it and get it out into the world. So talk about it for a minute, if you would.
Sure. I do love this little book, and I'm glad that it's a short book. It's really only what 140 pages or something, and the title being The Love Map, the subtitle being Saving Your Love Relationship and Incidentally Saving the World. Now, nobody really comes up with very much this totally brand new on the subject. Well, the subject of love is just a given. I mean, most thoughtful people, most people who have a right path that they're trying to follow. Understand the destiny of the destination that that path should take them is to love. Every major religion that's ever been brings us to what we call the golden rule, which is doing to someone else what you would like for someone else to do to you, which means love. And for us, I mean, there's no person in history who exemplified that better than Jesus. But there are other people who have also used the same kind of language. So what is there possibly new about love that anybody could bring up? Well, everybody keeps trying. You know, we have all these articles about marriage and da da da. Anyway, it occurred to me, see, my dear queer husband was, I think, the first guy in Utah just to discover the New Age back in the 70s.
That's great.
And I had always been interested in people's paranormal spiritual experiences and all of this. So I began to learn about, you know, what our friends in the East call the chakras. And I read this wonderful book by Anadea Judith called Wheels of Life, because the chakras, I mean, no surgeon can find them in the body. Right. But the idea is that our spiritual system has these wheels of development that go from the base of the spine up to the crown of the head. And so as I learned that, wow, that civilization follows this same path of development. Yes. And I thought, I think relationships do too. So I began to really think about that. And then I thought this could be a wonderful story. Because, you know, a piece of fiction that grabs somebody might do more for them than, you know, just another little ordinary sort of scholarly book about which I don't do anyway. So I played with this story for a long time, and ultimately I a couple of years ago I pulled out everything that had not worked before, and I made it work in this little book that I bill as, this story is fiction and it is true. And I do believe that every step of the description of what goes on in this little story is true. So just essentially, our heroine, Joanna, she is deeply in love with her man. They're married now for 3 years, and things have crumbled away and everything's not so glorious as it used to be. And they have arguments now and blah, 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 and a big kind of thing happens. Anyway, she is called by her employer at Google to go to Jerusalem on a fact-finding mission for the map makers. And she always wanted to be a map maker. So while she is there, and she's glad to be gone because it's her 3rd wedding anniversary coming up and she doesn't have much love left. So she's very despondent about what she's lost as she goes to do this work. And she is injured in an accident, in a bombing accident. And as she's recovering in her hotel room from a small concussion, she has a vision. She has a visionary experience. And her higher self appears to her and says, Joanna, you have come here on a hero's journey. You have come here to find true love. And if you can do that, you will heal not only your own relationship, you will heal the world. Because, you know, when I play around in this book with the idea of the tipping point, you know, that, and we know that everything has a tipping point. Things build, and then it just explodes. And I'm suggesting that in my story, Joanna and every one of us can be the tipping point. That if we, in our relationship, in our own personal journey, in our relationships with other people, this is not just a romantic love kind of thing. If we are able to move through these, and I call them kingdoms instead of chakras, but we go through these kingdoms, and Joanna is given this information that everybody on the journey must It's mandatory. It's spiritually mandatory. You can do it now or you can do it later. We've got forever, but we've got to do it.
Yes.
And all of us move from the first kingdom of just survival, the tools of survival, to the second kingdom, um, emotion, sexuality, reproduction, into the third in the abdomen, which energy is willpower and making things happen. And then the biggest challenge, the big one, is to move from the third up into the fourth, which is the heart, which is love. And Joanna comes to understand, and I think most of us would agree, that in our own lives, this is the challenge in our relationships. Some of us perhaps more than others, but in general, humanity and many relationships are stuck in the third of my power over your power, my will over your will. And through all these dramatic adventures, Joanna learns that that's exactly what she has done. And she is now stuck in the third. And the only way to save her relationship with her husband, that she really loves in spite of the anger and the disappointment and all that she has to find a way to move out of the third into the fourth, out of control into love. And your will, your good is my good. That's where we all have to be. And, we look around the world right now, we look around our country right now, and we see all this third energy playing out strongly. We look at our church right now, and I suggest we see some third energy playing out very strongly. Control, control, my will be followed.
Yeah.
So anyway, in this little story, and I won't tell any more than that, but of course it ends well. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is for every one of us to and the beauty of this little map, which is, of course, it goes up to the three higher ones very, very briefly, but the main point that we're all dealing with right now is moving out of the abdomen energy of control into the higher energy of love. And it's so simple. It's just these few inches. We can do it. But boy, every one of us is knocked back down time and time again. Boy, I am knocked back down, and I think, all right, there I am, back in the third, back in my wanting to control how things happen. Yes. And but it's helpful to me now to remember this little map. Okay. And the process that Joanna went through, which we won't get into, which actually is, repentance, just getting rid of all of the things that clog us up, forgiving. And if we understand that there's a map that we follow, that if we're stuck here, it's not that we're off track, it's just that we're on track, but are not sufficiently focused on the next steps. The next steps are fewer moments in the third and more moments in the fourth. And as individually we can do it, as in relationships we can do it, this wonderful energy will spill over. And this is what will finally cause peace on earth, goodwill to men and women, that enough human beings are living in the high energy of love, which is exactly what Jesus called us to do. What did he say about love? Love your neighbor. Love, of course, your family. Love the stranger at the gate. And guess what? Love your enemy. Boy, I've had some little imaginings. What would life would look like if the leaders of every nation woke up to not just our Christian point of view, but the best point of view of whatever culture they have, which is dedicated to love, like it or not. every major religion is dedicated to love. What would happen if the leader of every nation said, today I'm going to love my enemy? Wow.
It would be a different world, wouldn't it?
Indeed, it would.
Mm.
So anyway, that's that's a long, kind of a convoluted way to tell you about this book. But just I urge you to buy it either at my website. You can get signed copies of all my available books at my website, just carolynpearson.com, or you can go to Amazon and get this book and others of mine.
My delight was endless when I started reading the Love Map, and I was just so surprised when I started reading it and the chakras started coming up. I thought, my goodness, I've read a lot of Carolyn Pearson's books, and I did not know she was into the chakras. And anyone who follows my podcast and this work that I do knows how profoundly committed I am to this idea that truth is housed and just it's thrown worldwide, and God is so generous
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
showing us that truth can be found anywhere. And the chakra experience and what I have learned about the chakras as a trauma therapist has been profound. And when I was reading my first book about it, it was just one of those moments where the light bulb started going off, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is a different way to look at divine, capital T, truth, and to look at how people heal. And then my another light bulb goes off in terms of my theological mind, like, oh my goodness, this is another way to think about how we all exist in different levels of energy. And the more evolved and developed we get, the higher our energy level becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly what you so succinctly teach us in the Love Map. And I really, really loved your book because I did read a very kind of complex textbook sort of book, and I kind of got it, but it was complicated. And then when I read your book, I was like, oh, okay, this is sinking in. I'm understanding how to actually integrate the idea of energy levels and love and how we can evolve into the highest versions of ourselves. So those of you out there who hear, I'm saying this only because this would have been me a few years ago. I would have heard the word chakras and I would have thought, oh, that feels intimidating and overwhelming, and I don't know what that is. Don't be afraid of this concept. It is not overwhelming. And the way Carolyn articulates it in this beautiful book is very clear and very powerful. And it will, in fact, be something that very likely will resonate with you and how to grow your own beautiful soul. And so,
yes, yes, thank you. And actually, I use the word chakra only 3 times deliberately in the book because of the very reason that because I myself would have said, I appreciate the chakras, but they're not my religion or whatever. And so instead of using that word chakra, I talk about the kingdoms. And we talk about the kingdoms in our church. We talk about the celestial kingdom. But then, that would be a whole other way a lot of stuff to unpack there. But I loved using the word kingdoms because we do go from lower kingdom to higher, to higher, to higher. And then once we're fully complete citizens, not just visitors, but citizens of the 4th kingdom, which is the heart, which is love, then it's easy to manage the 3 higher ones because we will, from our voice, the 5th kingdom, speak only love. Yes. Everything we think about and our impulses will have traveled from the 3rd, been purified by the love and the 4th. And so we can only speak with love. And then higher still, we can only see through the eyes of love. And then higher still, we are love. We are part of God. We are part of love.
Yes.
That is our identity.
I love that. That's
actually it's just a wonderful map.
It's beautiful. And the way I remember what you're describing is exactly what I remember learning before I even was acquainted with your new book, which is the 3rd, you call it the 3rd kingdom is what is the most challenging to overcome. But once we get to the fourth, it's the gateway, and the floodgates open
Mm-hmm.
once we hit the
Mm-hmm.
heart,
Mm-hmm.
and our ability to evolve it hastens naturally, because we are more and more in those energy levels that only know how to grow and evolve and become closer to God. And it's all of our heritage. All of us can do this, and that is exactly why we're here in this world. And just to have the eyes to see that that is what life is all about, is to evolve and grow, and recognize that we all have what it takes to grow in these
Right.
beautiful ways. And this is a map to help us understand
Yeah.
that even if we're struggling, that that's normal, and that we're just, we're on pace, and that we have something to look forward to. So how okay, so they
Absolutely.
so they
Yeah.
they go ahead. Mhm.
And one of the phrases in our church that I really, really love is internal progression.
Yes. Yes.
Just take that phrase by itself and just think about it, which is, exactly what I'm writing about here in the love map, and in everything in our lives, because we should always be progressing in
Mhm.
one way or another.
Yes.
And then how that will play out in the next life, I have no interest in having to pin that down.
Sure.
That's not my business. That's absolutely not my business. That's God's business.
Yeah.
My business is right here and now, to do the things that I feel called to do with this impulse that is to constantly grow and do more and do more. And see, maybe this is the answer to what you were asking earlier, how the people who are, want to do something but are frightened to do it,
Yes.
know that you have the third kingdom energy and will to accomplish what it is that you feel called to do, especially if you take that impulse and move it up into the heart and do that work with love. I really think that I wrote this book, The Ghost to Eternal Polygamy. I really think that filtered up from the strong abdomen energy of power when I knew there was something hard that had to be done. But I did move that energy up to combine. I combined it with the loving energy of the heart. I know that I did.
Yes.
And if we can do that, there's a place in the book that I say, all it takes, when the third and the fourth combine, when guts of the abdomen combine with the heart, when guts and heart combine, there's nothing we can't do.
Yes. And you've probably just then helped us all understand the nature of the beautiful secret that is you, which is extraordinarily determined, but also filled with love. And I
I
think
hope for
that's,
that.
yeah, I see it. I think we all see it. And we are all so blessed to have a mentor in you. I hope this doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, Carolyn, but I think a prophet is someone who speaks truth in love. And
Well,
that's how I see you.
then we should all be, should we not?
That's what we're all
Yeah.
trying to
Thank you.
striving to do. You're welcome.
Oh, Valerie, thank you for all the good work that you do.
You're welcome.
Thanks to all the women and the men who might be listening to this.
Mhm.
And, we can bless each other. I bless everyone listening here to be a little stronger and a little more clear on what it is that you have to contribute. May that be so, and so it is. Amen and amen.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. The good news is, everybody, this is one of 2 episodes that Carolyn and I are doing. She will be back with us next time on this podcast, and she's going to be answering some of the people that in my small groups I have asked to submit questions to her that she is going to be answering in just a few days. And so stay tuned for that. And something else that I have up my sleeve to do is, we haven't even mentioned this yet, but she has also written in a beautiful book of poetry very recently called Finding Mother God. And it is my intention, I can get my act together and do what I'm planning to do, I'm going to be recording several of her poems and dropping them on the podcast as bonus episodes several times this week between this episode and our next episode together. So this is going to be a feast of the wise woman, Carolyn Pearson, here at Christmas time. And to make that feast complete, I would invite all of you to please run, don't walk, to your computers and buy a book, buy the love map and throw it in a stocking of a loved one or throw it in your own stocking and enjoy and appreciate the beautiful things that she has talked about this. Now, Carolyn, will you just say for a moment about what you offer in terms of your conversations with
Oh,
people? Mm-hmm.
oh, sure. I am not a therapist, but I offer an hour or a half an hour of conversation. If someone feels that they would benefit from talking to me about, well, my faith crisis is what I hear from a lot of people. I need to talk about that with you, um, or LGBT issues, or just personal issues, or just a chat. I just want to talk to you. So anybody who would benefit from that can just go in and register and sign up and pay a nominal fee for my time. That I would be very, very happy to I just enjoy these conversations. So anybody who feels that you might enjoy a personal interaction with me to talk about anything of your choice, go to my website
What
and sign up for that, a telephone consultation.
Well, that is a treat. My only concern on your behalf, Carolyn, is you might be inundated with requests for that because
Oh, well, we'll see.
what a treat. That is so just go to her website. That's carolynpearson.com. Is that correct?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, very good. So good to be with you all. If you are interested in joining one of my small groups, please do so. There are several going on and a couple new starting at the new year. So go ahead and reach out to me at info@valeriehammaker.com, or you can find me on Instagram at Latter-day Struggles Podcast. It has been a joyful hour plus for me and hopefully for you too. And I cannot wait to join Carolyn in a couple more days with you in our second conversation. Thanks for being here, everybody, and we will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.